In this lesson we're going to create the shader for our knife blade. So you can see I've got a render here which is basically at 75%. So if I go to view test resolution 75%, just make sure you're on that, and I've just done a region around here. Let's go back to the actual size here. So we can see this a bit bigger. Just make sure you can do that, otherwise it's going to be a bit blurry. So what we'll do first of all is assign a shader as usual. So first thing I'll do is use my selection sets here. I've created some sets here for you. So all you have to do is click on it. So we're going to click on the metal and then use the down arrow on your keyboard. And if you just look in the viewport here, you can see that the faces are all selected there because it's got the screws here and the metal that goes all the way around the handle, and the metal here as well. So we've selected all of that in one go. So now we can go to the rendering menu. You could also right click, but I'm just going to go to the rendering menu and lighting and shading and assign favorite material, and we're going to say assign AI standard. You could also click on assign new material and go to Arnold here, shader, and say standard if you wanted to as well. Doesn't make any difference. And then we're going to name this shader. This is our new shader. Let's call this knife blade. Okay, so we know it's the knife blade. And then let's go over here and let's just see what's going on here. Let's see that it's updating. Might just update the scene. Go to render update full scene. There we go. Okay, so now we have our shader assigned and we can adjust it. So just make this smaller here. Okay, so we're just looking at this little bit here. First thing we're going to do with metal is we need to turn down the diffuse. So it's mostly made up of shininess, so specular is the thing that you want. So at the moment this just looks very matte at the moment. So what we need to do is just turn this down to a sort of a dark grey, like this. And we're also going to turn the weight way down to something like that, maybe 0.118, and then we're going to just close up that section. Now we're going to go to the specular. So let's turn this up. We're going to turn this up to a nice bright value, something like 0.3. You can see it's very bright because it's got a lot to reflect. Remember there's that area light here, so it's picking that up here. And I'm just going to bring this down to a kind of a grey colour here, just so we can see this a bit better. I'll just wait for that to update. Okay, so you can see here you've got a bit of shininess going on, and what you can do is make that more blurry or less blurry to make it look a little bit more like chrome or less like chrome and a bit more used. So for example, if I take this roughness and slide it down to all the way to the bottom, you can see we've got a very sharp reflection. Not very interesting, especially with flat objects. It's very hard to light flat objects because they don't pick up the light, so you get sort of areas which are quite harsh, so you won't have this rounded look like here. So let's just broaden that reflection out and make it a bit more used. So I'm just going to change my roughness to something like a little bit higher, to maybe 1.16, 1.7-ish, something like that. Okay, so that will just bring that highlight over the edge there and just make it a little bit wider. Okay, and just to explain what this micro facet distribution does. So this is two different techniques, and they will have a different look in terms of the brightness of the brightest area. So have a look at this. You can see that it sort of spills over to this section and it's kind of coming over. If I was to change this to Beckman, which is a different method, you can see it's going to be a lot tighter and a lot sharper. Okay, so generally you just keep it on GGX, but sometimes you can use Beckman for some product renders where you want some really nice sharp tight reflections. So that's what I use that for, but GGX generally is the one to use, so we just leave that on. We've already described Fresnel when we did the glass here, so I'm not going to do that. So we've got the basic values in here, so all we need is a bit of breakup now. So the scratches and things that you see, are based on the specular. So we can vary the color of this specular and have different values, so it's a little bit brighter or a little bit darker, so it looks like scratches in the shininess. Okay, so you can either map the color or you can map the roughness. Okay, and sometimes you can map both. So in this case we're going to do color because it's a bit more noticeable, but roughness is a good one to use as well when you've got something like a really shiny surface but some of it is scuffed, and then you can have a darker value like a dark grey in those areas so that it looks rougher in those areas. So I'm just going to map my color with a file texture, and we're just going to pick a file here. So what we'll do is it should open up into your source images textures folder. If not, just go into textures, and we want knife metal specular. Make sure you use the TIFF, not the TX file, because you may have a TX file there because of my renders, but don't use that, otherwise it's going to come out too dark. And if you look at this file, let's just open this and then I'll press view. So if you look at this file, you can see it's got lots of scratches and it's fairly contrasty. If you wanted it to be even more contrasty, you can take it into your favorite editing program like Photoshop and just increase the contrast, and that will give you a more kind of used look. But I'm just going to close that for now. There we go. So now we can see the roughness and stuff. So let's just make sure this is on the actual size. So it's a bit bigger. So hopefully you can see the scratches there. I'm just going to turn down the reflections just a tad, maybe have a little play with that, or the diffuse maybe. Just bring that down a little bit. If you want more contrast, you can turn that down, and now you can see these scratches a bit better. Just zoom in a bit. Those will show up a bit better when we've got higher quality rendering. Okay, so with metal, you want to map the specular and the roughness for the most effect. Obviously, you do map color sometimes as well, and you can vary the color as well. If you want to, you can put the same map into color. So if I were to just click on this, click on File, and just put the same map in, so knife specular, metal specular. And I'll just make sure I update this, so just do update full scene, update full scene. Just going to re-export that, so let's just see what that comes out like. Okay, that's a bit more contrasty. So what I've done there is just mapped the color, the diffuse color, with the same map. Okay, so it depends on what effect you're going for, but that's how we create the metal material. Just make sure you've got quite a dark diffuse, you've got a high contrast specular map, and then you can map your roughness if you want to, and your weight to control how much reflections you've got. Of course, if you want less, you can just turn that down, or if you want more, you can turn that up, and it's going to multiply that value and make it a bit brighter if you want a brighter kind of reflection on that. I'm just going to bring it down to something like 0.4 maybe.